Good evening, everyone, and you're all welcome to the first episode of the spring series of webinars which are being brought to you tonight by the advisory staff here in County Mayo. Now, my name is Brendan Garry, and I work in Teagasc and Ballinrobe, and tonight for the next hour, I'm delighted to be your host for this online webinar, where we'll focus on some key environmental issues such as water quality, biodiversity, greenhouse gases being some of the main issues that are facing farmers over the next few years. Now, to launch the series of events tonight, which are going to run for the next 8 weeks, I'm delighted to ask Vivian Silke here, Regional Teagasc Manager here for County Mayo, to launch the series officially. Over to you now, Vivian.
Thank you, Brendan. Good evening, folks. I hope that you'll learn a bit tonight from the webinar. We have a series of 8 of them running for the next 8 Wednesday nights, taking out St. Patrick's Day, obviously. So we have different topics covering all aspects of agriculture. You have registered for tonight, so you've joined. So every week from now on, you'll get a reminder text at 7:45 on your phone to focus in on the next webinar. Next week is on sheep, and there's various different topics after that. So I hope you enjoy tonight, and if you pick up 1 or 2 things about water quality and environment, which is very important from now on, and also about the bees, which Sean will speak about, and enjoy the night, and I hand you back to our host, Brendan. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Now, you, the viewers at home tonight, are being encouraged to engage with our panelists through our Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screens. We'll certainly endeavour to answer as many of these questions as possible live tonight. Any unanswered questions then will be answered and followed up in the coming days. So now at this stage, I'd like to take this opportunity to outline what's in store tonight. The first speaker tonight will be Mary Roache from Teagasc Westport, who will speak to us on buffer margin guidelines when applying fertilizers and pesticides, while Peter Comer, Teagasc Ballina, will talk to us about some of the new technologies aimed at reducing greenhouse gases, including protected urea and low-emission slurry spreading systems. While tonight we're also joined by Sean Corrigan from the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, who will speak to us about the Let It Be project underway in Newport. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the coming days on the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel. So indeed, you can follow up there and watch it there. So without further delay, I'll get you, Mary, now, as soon as you're ready there to go, to start presenting your presentation to us. And it's over to you now, Mary.
Okay, thank you very much. As Brendan said, we're focusing a little bit on water quality tonight. And so on that, what I'm going to speak about tonight is buffer zones on farms. And the buffer zones on farms I'm going to talk about are in relation to nutrients and pesticide use on farms. Now, I suppose the topics I'm going to cover are, first of all, just to be clear, what is a buffer zone? After that, then we'll talk about the benefits of buffer zones and why it is that we actually need buffer zones on farm. I'm then going to cover what are your obligations as regards buffer zones for chemical and organic nutrients. There's also buffer zones for pesticides to protect water quality, so I'm going to cover a little bit on that as well. Okay, so just to get into it. So first of all, what is a buffer zone? So I need everyone, first of all, to be clear on what these buffer zones are. And just to have a little visual there for you to look at, and it's the area in between the red lines or red arrows there are basically what a buffer zone is. Now, a buffer zone, it's a no-spread zone for nutrients and pesticides. So it's an absolute no-spread zone for these items. Now, a buffer zone, it can be fenced or it may be unfenced. It can be grassy or it may even be planted with trees. But it is required under regulation to protect our waters from runoff. And that is why we need buffer zones. So now, what are the benefits of that buffer zones? Why should you have them? I have a few slides with pictures after this, so to emphasize the points. But the benefits of buffer zones is it improves biodiversity. It regulates light and temperature, and that's not just within the buffer zone area itself, but also the adjacent waters. It provides shade and shelter, and again, that is not just within the buffer zone itself, but also the adjacent waters. A big thing on farms is the buffer zones intercept silt and nutrients from making their way into our waters. In other words, you're breaking the pathway by having a buffer zone. Another thing you may not think about, but the buffer zones actually work to stabilize watercourse banks from erosion. As well as that, they provide a wildlife corridor for movement, and overall putting everything together, and the big benefit of buffer zones for us and from a farming community point of view is that they actually improve water quality. Now, this is just a visual for you to look at, and this is just clearly showing improved biodiversity in a buffer zone. It's very clear here for you to see where the actual buffer zone is. And again, like I said, it's not necessary that it needs to be fenced off, but it's an area that does not receive any nutrients or any pesticides. And so basically, from that point of view, then it is completely biodiverse. And Sean Corrigan will be speaking about the importance of having these biodiverse buffer zones as well for his project. So you can see the flowering plants that are there, and they are great for our native pollinators. Again, they give shade, it gives shelter, they're corridors of movement, and they're hiding places for wildlife. They're providing food there as well, and they're shade and shelter also for the drain, which you see there at one side of that actual buffer zone. And a very important function here, because the fields adjacent to this buffer zone are actually for cropping. So when that land is being tilled, you will have a danger of a bit of runoff of nutrients and indeed silt. So they act not as plants actually to take up the nutrients, but they actually act as a physical barrier from silt getting into the water. So that is a prime example of a good biodiverse buffer zone. And I want you all to realize that in the future, you are going to get a benefit from these buffer zones, from any environmental schemes that are coming on, or if your farm is going to be evaluated on how much biodiversity you have on it, these buffer zones will be absolutely essential going forward, that you have them on your farm. As I said, it can prevent bank erosion. If you have growing plants on your buffer zone and a good system of roots, they can help hold the bank and stabilise it in places. And indeed, there are some projects down in the south of Ireland where they actually plant willow to help stabilise banks, which are very prone to erosion. So again, that's just another benefit of having a buffer zone. This, from a farming point of view, is something that we come across quite a lot, and it is where we have a drinking point with absolutely no buffer zone along the watercourse. So you would have a lot of cattle coming down, taking a drink from the watercourse. While they're doing this, they're pushing down clay, silt, sediment down into the watercourse. The animals themselves are applying nutrients to the water through dung and urine, and so that is getting direct into the water. If you have silt being pushed down and clay into the water, you can get that floating downstream and clogging up where fish need to be spawning, and the spawning beds are destroyed. And also if you have a freshwater pearl mussel area, this will absolutely destroy the habitat for freshwater pearl mussel if you have a lot of silt and sediment getting in as well as nutrients. So under new regulations, a lot of these, if you're in Gloss, you will have to have this fenced off and prevent animals from taking a drinking point. And also, any farmer who is now in derogation also will have to fence off water courses and not allow animals to take a drink. So again, like I said, a buffer zone here would be a huge benefit to water quality. Now, if the animals themselves are not applying the nutrients, then it's the farmer who will be applying the nutrients. And look, it's very timely, I think, that we're having this discussion just at the moment, because we are heading towards the growing season and there will be a lot of nutrients applied to land. So as you can see clearly here, you can see there's a good buffer zone in between where the slurry has been spread and where the water course is. And that has to be left, and it has to be a 5 metre buffer zone. But the buffer zone here is not just that stretch there that you can clearly see where there is no slurry spread, but there's also an actual physical buffer zone in that there's actually a bank there, which is a physical barrier also to any nutrients washing off and getting in. And again, it's uncultivated, so the plants there again will be better able to take up any nutrients. So this is something that I need you to think about prior to spreading any nutrients. Now, it's key to know what your buffer zones are, so that's what I'm going to cover next for you. So what are your buffer zones? How far back must you keep? Any surface waters that you have, and when I say surface waters, I'm talking about dry drains as well as wet drains. So if you're spreading nutrients, farmyard manure, any organic manures, you must keep 5 metres back from your surface waters, okay? And surface waters where there's a slope exceeding 10%, you must keep 10 metres back. So if you have any fields adjacent to watercourses that have a steep slope in them, then you must remember 10 metres back is what your buffer zone should be in that case to avoid any nutrients getting into the water. Again, if you're in an area where you have karst features and swallow holes or a lot of springs, then we're talking about groundwater there. Maybe it's not always quite so visible to you. You don't see it so much and you might not think so much about it, but that is hugely vulnerable to nutrients getting into it. So if you have any of these groundwater features in your area, a swallow hole or any of these karst features, remember the buffer zone there is extended back to 15 meters. A lake shoreline, again, this will be very visible to you. On the lakes, it's 20 meters back is the distance that you must keep if you are spreading your slurries or your farmyard manures. If you're in an area where there is a drinking water abstraction point for human consumption, your buffer zone can be anything from 25 to 200 meters. So I would urge you, if you know of the fact that there is a drinking water abstraction point in your area, please contact either your local group water scheme, the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, or even your local authority and find out what is the size of that supply, because the size of the supply is what is going to dictate how far back you must keep. The bigger supply, the further back you must keep with your buffer zone. And these are no spread zones. Now, it mightn't be that the extraction point is at the bottom of your land, but it might be at the bottom of the next door neighbour's land. But if you're within 200 meters of it and it's a larger supply, then you must be conscious of that. So always keep this in your awareness if there's a water supply coming anywhere from the vicinity of where you are farming. And just to mention while I'm here, storage of round bales, because this is something that I often see. If you are storing round bales out on land, the buffer zone and the distance that you must keep back from water courses is 20 meters. Okay, so just to be clear on that, unless you're having your round bales stored within a farmyard setup, you must keep 20 meters back. Land storage of farmyard manure also, and I'm conscious of this if people are lambing sheep at the minute and may have farmyard manure and may think that they're going to clean out sheds and keep it out on land. If you're going to do that, again, remember 20 meters back. And can I please emphasize the fact to everybody that when I say 20 meters back from water courses, this is also from what we call dry drains, because the department's view on it is they're dry maybe during the summertime, but if you get a heavy shower of rain, they're wet, and there are all pathways to carry nutrients into the nearest drain or the next river. So every drain you have out there is what the application here is of the buffer zone. So watch your buffer zones, and it's not just from the rivers, it is also from what you might think is a dry drain. You still need to be very careful with those. They are pathways that can carry nutrients down into rivers, which can carry right into a drinking water supply. And something that I know people don't often think about is their chemical fertilizer, maybe because it's not just quite as visible as the slurries and the farmyard manures, but on the chemical fertilizers, you do actually also have a buffer zone, and the chemical fertilizer, the buffer zone there is 2 meters. And again, like I said, that is also from what we call wet and dry drains. One thing that I didn't mention in the beginning there, and I'm just going to say it to you so I would remind you, and it's not something maybe that a lot of people around this side of the country might be so concerned about, but once the season opens for spreading slurry, and if weather conditions, ground conditions and everything else is okay, for the first 2 weeks, there is an extended buffer. That 5 meters actually goes to 10 meters. So for the first 2 weeks of the spreading season and the last 2 weeks of the spreading season, you must double up your buffer zone. So it goes from 5 meters to 10 meters. And the reason for that is because you're not having grass growing, you're having wetter conditions, and soil temperatures are lower, and your prospects for having a runoff is going to be much higher. So please remember that 5 meters is the general one throughout the growing season, but for the first 2 weeks and the last 2 weeks of when you may be spreading, when the season opens, you must double it up to 10 meters. Again, check with any of your local advisors if you cannot remember, or before you go to spread anything, if you just want to double check, give a quick ring into your advisor and we will just tell you what this is. Again, now I just want to mention a little bit about pesticides and buffer zones for pesticides. We have a lot of issues with pesticides in waters and in drinking water supply, unfortunately, in areas in this county. And it's something that we need to be conscious of. The buffer zone is stated on the product label. Look, there's a huge amount of products out there, and I couldn't go through every single one of them, but the regulation on them as regards a buffer zone is what is written on the label. So that is what you must 100% go by. And I know them labels are not that easiest to read, but that is what is going to dictate to you what that actual buffer zone is. And the only one that I just want to be a little bit clearer about and just emphasize to you is MCPA sprays have a buffer zone of 5 meters. And I'm just saying that because 5 meters is a huge buffer. And that is, again, same as with the nutrients, that is 5 meters back from any type of drain that you have out there on your farm, whether you think it's a dry drain or not. You must keep 5 meters back with your MCPA sprays. Again, just the MCPA sprays are the likes of Mortone or NU46, any of these what we call Roache sprays. So just watch that one because it is quite a large buffer zone there on that one. Your minimum buffer for any pesticide is 1 meter back from waters. And the reason I'm saying this is because I have seen numerous times farmers spraying pesticide right up to the edge of the drain. And not only just that, but actually spraying the pesticide right down into the drain. And I don't know where they think that this pesticide is going to end up, because we do know where it ends up. It ends up down in a drinking water supply, and it is tested and it is found to be breaching the limits. You cannot, under any circumstances, be spraying any pesticide under an agricultural use within a meter of any water. It is not allowed for use that way, and absolutely under no circumstances should you go within a meter with any pesticide that you are spraying out there. You are not allowed, and under no circumstances spraying down into drains thinking that you're clearing the vegetation. That is completely detrimental to water quality, and it is against every regulation that is out there, and it's hugely visible from anybody driving along the road. I've seen it myself. So I would urge you to please do not even consider doing this. It's completely detrimental. And again, for Sean coming speaking afterwards, he will tell you as well the same thing. Again, as regards to pesticides, there is statutory no-use zones around drinking abstraction points, and that ranges from 5 meters to 200 meters. So again, if you are anywhere near a drinking water abstraction point as regards pesticides, you could have to keep anything up to 200 meters back. So before you go using any product and you're anywhere near a drinking water abstraction point, remember there are no-use zones. Just double check with the local authority or with the National Federation of Groups Water Schemes or your group water scheme, or even myself and Peter. Just give us a ring and we will try and point you in the right direction as to what that zone is. So look, that's a quick run through the buffer zones and what is required and why. And again, look, you can pass any questions on to us again and we will do our best to answer them. So a quick run through, but just to emphasize to you how important buffer zones are on farm for us to maintain good water quality, which we're required to do. Thank you.
That's great, Mary. Now, and you've given us a lot there to think about. I'll just get you just to stop sharing your screen there now with us, and we will just call on our next speaker, which is Sean Corrigan. And Sean is from the National Federation of Group Water Schemes. He's based in Mayo. He's been, I suppose, involved there with a project down in Newport for the last number of years, and over the last number of years has worked with a number of families there in the Roscommon region. And indeed, they're going to take the learning there from a similar type project there and hopefully apply it in Newport. So, Sean, over to you now, and indeed, you're welcome again to our webinar tonight. Okay, Sean, we cannot hear you there. Yeah, Sean, you're on mute.
My apologies, I hit a wrong button there.
That's okay, yeah.
Thanks for having me on now, I really appreciate it. I suppose I'm not a farmer myself. My father comes from a farming background, but I have worked in lots of areas across Mayo helping people with their water supplies. I've worked in Ballycroy and Killeen and Kilmina. So I have worked with a large segment of the farming community there. And currently I'm working on a project over in Roscommon to help people protect their water supplies from pesticides, and as well from fecal matter from not just animal waste but human waste as well in septic tanks, because people tend to point the finger a lot at the farming community in certain sections of the media, but everyone has a role to play in what we're trying to achieve. So the project we're doing in Newport is a spin-off of what we've carried out in Roscommon, where we have seen reductions of pesticide use across the catchments that we're working in. And like I said, we're not only working with the farming community, we also have information shown at marts. We work with the local radio. local schools. We have information out on social media. We have water stations out across some of the catchments. We work with our local newspapers and the local community as well. Like, everyone has a role to play in this, what we're trying to achieve, because water is so important for everybody. And none of us, a lot of us have families, young families, or elderly parents or grandparents, and none of us want to drink water that has pesticides in them. So the Let It Be project, it's a group water scheme initiative, but it's being sponsored by the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, by LawPro, by Irish Water, and by Mayo County Council as well. And what we're offering is, we're offering 5 beehives across the Newport catchment, along with bees, along with training, mentoring, equipment, to farmers, families, community groups in the catchments. And we have a fantastic mentor. He's probably known to some of the farmers there from Newport, a guy called Jude Walsh. And Jude has award-winning honey, but he's also, like I said, he's also a farmer himself. And I think Jude turned to beekeeping about 10 years ago. His mother had some kind of ailment and she wanted to get local honey, and he couldn't get it anywhere. And I think Jude has over 100 hives now. And I suppose it's another income for him, along with his farming income as well. And the people that we'll be working with in Newport will get to work with Jude, which is very good for ourselves. So our objectives here is to reduce pesticides in the water sources in the Newport catchment. And you can see an outline of the catchment here in light blue. It's a fairly big area, and what's happening within this catchment is that pesticides are getting in to the local water supply. And like I said, nobody wants to drink water with pesticides in it, no matter how much it is. Like, if I was to give you a glass of water, one had pesticide in and one hadn't, you'd pick the one that didn't have it. But the problem is, you cannot tell which one has it, because it's such a minute amount. If you take the foil cap off a bottle of pesticide and put it into a drain, if that drain is 1 meter wide and 1 meter deep, you can detect that 30 kilometers away. So this is really potent stuff, and none of us want to drink it. So I suppose, like, the project that we're working on is giving something to the farming community. It's not taking something away. It's not us going along with a big stick and telling people they can't do this or they can't do that. We're trying to encourage people by giving the beehives, for them to create environments which are healthy for bees to work in, or healthy for bees to live in. And it's a product that the farmers will get themselves as well. We started this project off in an area called the Cora Group Water Scheme. It's based near Tulskin, Roscommon. And the red line that you can see there is the water catchment. So any rain that falls in this area will make it down into the drinking water source for the Cora Group Water Scheme. You'll see yellow dots there. These are 3 beehives that we give to the farming community in the Cora scheme. And the yellow radius, the yellow circles around, is where the bees fly to. So bees, once they leave the hive, they can fly up to 3 miles either way or any way to get food to bring it back to their hive. So if you spray pesticides in this area, not only are you damaging the water in the catchment, you're also damaging the bees. And people have an affinity to bees. And what we're seeing in Roscommon is that by having bees in your local community, people are becoming more mindful on of what they spray on the ground or what they don't spray on the ground. And this is protecting not only the native honeybees, but other pollinators as well. Like, I'm sure a lot of us have got in our cars and drove from Castlebar to Belmullet or to Dublin or to Galway. And years ago, when you get there, your windscreen would be covered in bugs and insects, but that's not the case now. We're losing habitats across the rural areas, and we're losing insects through, I suppose, pesticides and other chemicals as well. And the habitats that we're losing along our rivers, along our streams, along our drains, they're actually having a detrimental effect on our water quality. Runoff is coming in, getting in quicker into our drains, into our water, and it's affecting our water supply. And this is water that we all drink and our families drink as well. So we all have a part to play in trying to protect our water courses. Some of our families here in the Roscommon scheme, you can see, like, it's an enjoyable project. And we have farmers of all types of, we don't have just extensive farmers, there's intensive farmers as well. So anyone that's kind of got into this is really enjoying it. And we have 21 farmers now across Roscommon who are training to become beekeepers, and they're going out, they're putting in riparian zones along rivers to create a place for their bees to eat so that they can harvest a crop of honey. And they're changing their use of pesticides. The project recently won a European Bee Award, and it was for change of land management use. So this was given by the European Parliament there before Christmas. So it's kind of showing what we're doing in the west of Ireland is being championed across other parts in Europe. Simple things like keeping bees and creating habitats for them to survive. So the farmer gets an income from the honey, the bees get a place to live, and it has a positive impact on our water supply. So everyone kind of wins something about it. You know, it's not taking away anything, everybody wins something from it. When we went out and spoke to the farmers in the beginning, we realized, you know, that there was a lot of the farmers that we spoke to felt that they were being blamed for a lot of things that were happening in rural Ireland. So we came up with an initiative for, I suppose, the wider community, and we're going to roll this out in Newport as well. So every national school child in the Newport catchment, and that includes the group schemes of Glen Hest, Clubay and Kilmena as well, will be receiving information on what they can do in their own gardens. And they'll also be receiving a native Irish woodland tree as well. Now, we rolled this out to 88 schools in Roscommon, and it was very well received. So again, we're trying to create an awareness there that, you know, it's not just the farming community, it's the person working beside the road, it's the person going outside the wall, spraying a garden or spraying a hedge, and that runoff is getting into your water supply. So we're trying to create an awareness that, you know, there are alternative uses to pesticides, as there are on the farm as well, which the ASAP advisors like Mary and Peter will create. So I suppose what we like in return is we'd like the farming community to create bee-friendly habitat. And there was questions raised in Roscommon about would they lose their subsidies, would they lose any farm payments? And if it's along a water course, you will not lose any farm payments for this. So, like, you know, there's no loss to the farming community on that. We want people to talk to their neighbours about the damage that pesticide can do. And some of our farmers in Roscommon have actually put in wild meadow flowers as well. And again, they put this along marginal land that's not very good for them. But again, it's creating a habitat for their own bees as well, and it's not impacting on any of their basic payments. Just a quick example here now. This is a farm in Roscommon. There were 7 farmers involved here. They all, like, one of the farmers got a beehive. He went out and spoke to his neighbours, and they've all come together and they've all started to put in riparian areas along a drain which leads directly to a water source in Roscommon. So we hope it has a positive impact, not just on the pesticides, but on the nutrient runoff as well in that particular area. And the motivators, we spoke to the farmers again, once they got on board, they all had different motivations for doing this. Like, some of them wanted to protect their local water supply. They knew their families were drinking from this water supply, so they wanted to help protect it. Others wanted to provide a habitat and food for their bees. Others wanted to improve biodiversity. They remembered being young lads and young ladies years ago out in the fields listening to the birds singing and seeing all the insects around, and that's gone in some areas now. And others wanted to help the local community. So I suppose the next step, if you're interested and if you're in the Newport catchment, contact either myself, Mary, or Peter, or you can send an email to protectourwater@nfgws.ie, or if you're on a group water scheme yourself, contact your local group water scheme and ask them, can you get involved as well? Like I said, it's a nice project. It's a project that kind of brings people back to nature, and everyone kind of gains from it as well. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Sean, there now. So I'll just get you to stop sharing your screen. That's brilliant. And Sean, I suppose, look, thanks very much for your presentation. And just to remind our viewers at home tonight that, you know, you're asked to engage with our panelists here through the Q&A function, and there's a good lot of farmers on tonight, and indeed, look, we'd love some questions shortly after the last presentation. We'll put the questions to Peter, to Sean, and to Mary. So look, you know, certainly we would love if you could engage with us on the Q&A tab. So finally this evening, our last speaker is Peter Comer, and Peter's going to talk to us about some of the new technologies aimed at lowering our greenhouse gas emissions over the next number of years. So it's over to you now, Peter.
Thanks, Brendan. Just
That's perfect, Peter. Now just back to the start. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Brendan. So my talk this evening is on protected urea and low emission slurry spreading, because these are 2 of the biggest weapons we have in our arsenal to reduce ammonia emissions, and also then if we can get farmers to change from CAN over to protected urea, well, then we can also tackle one of the greenhouse gases in terms of nitrous oxide. Okay, so recently then the government put up some targets there through the Department of Agriculture for low emission slurry spreading. So we can see there they're looking for maybe a 60% usage by 2023, 80% by 2025, and 90% by 2027. So ambitious targets there. And on the protected urea side, they're looking to replace all standard urea with protected urea by 2023, and to replace 65% of CAN nitrogen with protected urea. So as I say, quite ambitious targets there, but it shows you just which way the wind is blowing there, and farmers can maybe get ready for that. So on the next slide there, just a quick look at the two pie charts. The one on the left is ammonia, and the one on the right is greenhouse gases. So on the ammonia is more to do with clean air rather than a greenhouse gas. But on that, and agriculture is responsible for 98% of ammonia emissions, so practically them all. So tonight we'll be looking at the manure spreading there and the fertilizer. So 26 plus 7, so that's over a third we can influence over a third of ammonia emissions by our lower emissions slurry spreading and our protected urea. And then over on the other side, we have the greenhouse gases. And of course, methane is the big one, but also quite big then is the one we'll be talking about tonight, which is the N2O or nitrous oxide emissions. And we can affect that if we can get farmers to change from CAN over to protected urea. So a quick look there at ammonia projections. If we don't do something, we were supposed to be this year or last year 1% below our 2005 levels. So we were meant to be down at 112 kilotons, but we're actually up at 119, so well short there. And for 2030, the target is to be 5% below our 2005 levels. But as you can see, if we keep going the way we're going to be miles off. And protected urea and low emission slurry spreading, as I say, they're the two heavy hitters, the two big ones that we can help to bridge that gap. So what is protected urea? Well, it's a urea nitrogen fertilizer made safe from ammonia gas loss by adding a urease inhibitor. And it can be added either to the surface or in the melt process. So there's three main types there. We needn't get into the chemistry of them, only just to say that they're well monitored and regulated by the Department of Agriculture. So they're safe products, and the department checks to make sure the companies put in the right amount and that they do the job. So on the bottom there, the graph or illustration, you can see a granule of urea, or it's put on the ground, it absorbs moisture, and then through a process of hydrolysis, it's converted to ammonium and onto nitrate and uptake by the plant. But with ordinary urea, during the process of hydrolysis there, depending on the weather conditions, you could get massive ammonia losses there. So that's off into the atmosphere. So you're losing nitrogen, so that's no good to the farmer, and it's gone off into the atmosphere, which is no good for our clean air policy. So a double whammy. So by adding the urease inhibitor there, you can massively reduce the ammonia losses, but no effect on the chemistry there, converting the urea to ammonium and on for normal grass growth. So this can be a bit confusing. So I tried to summarize it in this chart there. If we look at CAN, it's low ammonia emissions, so that's a win. It has high nitrous oxide emissions, so that's where it loses. If we look at ordinary urea, high ammonia emissions, so we lose there, but it has low nitrous oxide emissions, so a win there. But then the bottom one, for protected urea, it has low ammonia emissions, which is a win, and low nitrous oxide emissions, which is a win. So anytime you get a win-win situation, it's always good. But of course, the problem is only about 5% of actual nitrogen last year was used in the form of protected urea. So the message isn't really getting out there, or maybe farmers are afraid. So why might they be afraid? Well, they might think it mightn't yield well. Well, Johnstown has done extensive trials on protected urea across 6 different sites across the country over 2 years, so varying weather conditions and seasons. And the results from the trial is that there's no difference between the yield from protected urea versus CAN versus indeed ordinary urea. So farmers can be fully satisfied there. They'll get the yield return, as I say, across seasons and across weather conditions. Also on the nitrogen recovery front, protected urea has very similar nitrogen recovery rates to CAN, and better than ordinary urea. So you get more bang for your buck there with protected urea, because of course there's less nitrogen being lost. And if we just look at this graph here, this peak here, this is showing the loss from ordinary urea. And of course, most losses occur shortly after, inside a day or two of putting it out. But a big loss from ordinary urea of ammonia when it's put out in dry summer weather, and I suppose that's why the advice is not to use it in the summertime or in the dry weather. But if you look at protected urea and CAN, of course, look down here, the graph's right down on the floor, very low ammonia losses. So the question there is, will a urease inhibitor protect urea from loss in dry summer conditions? And the answer is yes. That's what it's protected. That's what protected urea products are designed to do. That's what you pay your money for. And another benefit then they discovered really was that protected urea also reduces losses during periods of cold weather, because they found in some of the trials they put them out, and they found the biggest losses were actually in some of the applications put out in March, where you had cold, harsh, windy weather. And the protected urea, you had less losses of ammonia in that situation than the ordinary urea. So again, a double win there for the protected urea, which means that it can really be used right throughout the season without any fear. And okay, so again, why are farmers not using it? Maybe they think it's too expensive. Well, a quick look here at the relative costs, and I put in February 2019 and February 21, just the prices, and it's remarkable actually how similar the prices of the products are in both years. So it's just showing you CAN is the most expensive when you work it out in euro per kilo of nitrogen. So it's coming in at €1.05. Ordinary urea is coming in at the cheapest at 85 cents, and protected urea in the middle, 95 cents. And as I say, I checked the prices there last week, and they're practically the same. Protected urea actually that little bit cheaper, 91 cents. But the researchers would say that even though protected urea is shown a little bit more expensive than ordinary urea, it's actually not. It could even be cheaper when you work it out per kilo of nitrogen available to the plant, because as we just saw, it has less losses. So there's more, you're getting more bang for your buck with the protected urea. And just there are a number of products available on the market, and there are, I just checked locally there's a number of protected urea is available locally to purchase. And as I say, all these products are monitored by the department. They check for the safety, for the levels of urease inhibitor included, to make sure that they're up to scratch and doing the job. And okay, you can buy protected urea with sulfur added, which is good, and indeed Johnstone Castle would recommend sulfur as because of its benefits. And you could get it with potassium, but it's not safe to use with phosphorus, so there's no mix there. But in the first instance, we're trying to get farmers just to switch ordinary urea, where they were using it, just to switch that to protected urea. That would be a great start. So you can check out all these products if you want on the teagasc.ie website. There you get all that information. And just to finish off on urea, it has lower greenhouse gas emissions than CAN. It has lower ammonia emissions than ordinary urea. reliable yield right across the seasons and over different years. Also, they're looking in a long-term trial there at the indicators. Is it affecting soil microbiology? And the preliminary indications say no. There's no damage or change to the soil microbes by using protected urea, so that's good news. The other thing they're looking at with Vista Milk, and that is they're doing extensive and have done extensive tests on milk to make sure that there's no residues in milk, because, as you know, there was a scare there a year or two ago. But they can confidently say there's no issues of residue in milk with the protected urea product. So then the last line there is the good news that the emission reductions that you get with protected urea are verifiable, and agriculture gets the credit at national level. So that's very useful when it comes to national accounting. So moving on then quickly to low emission slurry spreading. And again, this slide, it just shows slurry put out different methods. So if you take the splash plate slurry applied, you could expect to get about 0.6 of a kilo of nitrogen per meter cubed or per ton of slurry. If you move on, then if you put that out as a dribble bar application, that could move up to 0.8 of a kilo. Mightn't seem much, but that's actually a third. That's 30%, 33% increase in fertilizer value, nitrogen fertilizer value. And you could even get a further increase if you went to the trailing shoe. You could get up to 1 kilo of nitrogen per meter cubed. So a big advantages in nitrogen use there by moving on to the low emission slurry spreading. Now, the low emission slurry spreading, its main benefit is it reduces the ammonia loss. Again, so looking at this graph, we'll see the higher, you can see the higher ammonia loss there with the splash plate versus the trailing shoe. And now in that trial, it was only 36% less losses compared with the splash plate, but total ammonia emission reductions of up to 65% have been found with the other studies. Okay, so that's really good. And of course, most slurry nitrogen losses occur immediately after application, in fact, in the first 12 hours or so. Okay, and another slide looking at the nitrogen fertilizer replacement values. Again, looking at splash plate, dribble bar, trailing shoe, and shallow injection. The ammonia abatement, we'll say, if we take the slurry plate to be 0, well, you can get 30% less losses by going to the dribble bar, up to 60% less losses with the trailing shoe, and up to 70% with the shallow injection. So what does that mean for slurry availability? Well, 27% with the splash plate, increasing to 35% slurry availability with the dribble bar, and up to 43 and 46% with the trailing shoe and shallow injection. So if we're to look at that in terms of how much nitrogen in 11 meters cubed or 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry, well, that would be 7 kilos of nitrogen for the splash plate, increasing to 9 kgs for the dribble bar, and 11 kgs for the trailing shoe, and 12 kgs for the shallow injection. And what's that worth? Well, in money terms, it could be €6 for the splash plate, increasing to 770 for the dribble bar, 940 for the trailing shoe, and 1020 for the shallow injection. So all of this is showing that as you move towards low emission slurry spreading, you're reaping the benefits in getting more nitrogen use for your plant. So we know these low emission slurry spreading is costly, whether it's increased contractor charges or buying the equipment, but you will get a lot of the money back over time in higher nitrogen recovery. But, and this is an important but, you must take that into your account in your nitrogen fertilizer program. You have to reduce the chemical nitrogen to take account of the increased nitrogen in the slurry. Otherwise, you're probably doing more harm than good, because you're getting more nitrogen in the slurry and you're still putting out the same amount of chemical. So that's not what to do. Okay, and again, another looking at fertilizer replacement value here. So slurry applied at 33 meters cubed per hectare or 3,000 gallons per acre in old money. So if it was put out in summertime with the splash plate, you'd get almost 10 kilos of nitrogen. But if that same 3,000 gallons was put out in the springtime using a trailing shoe, you could get 33 kilos of nitrogen. So that's an extra 23 kilos of nitrogen there, worth about €20 per hectare. Or another way of looking at it is that could supply a third of your first cut silage nitrogen requirement. But again, you must build that into your plan and reduce your chemical nitrogen fertilizer.
Just another minute or two now, Peter, that's all.
Yeah, to finish. So low emission slurry spread in there, they are costly to buy, but you could have a TAMS grant. They are implicated in the nitrogen regulations because irrigation farmers have to use low emission slurry spreading, and if you're in GLOS, it could be a voluntary method or it might be part of any new scheme. Low emission slurry spreading helps improve water quality because there's less runoff because it's assimilated quicker into the plant, and you have less ammonia losses, so you get less nitrogen falling back down on sensitive areas, so that neither needs nor wants this nitrogen. And some practical issues maybe, okay, well, the more watery the slurry and the better agitated, the better it works. I suppose same with any slurry tanker. You need wider gaps and bigger fields maybe because of the size of the equipment. You don't want lumps of silage or stones or plastic or netting in the machine, getting into the machine. It has a macerator, but there's a limit to what it can do. The equipment is heavier, so you do need drier soils, but of course the rule is you should always have drier soils when you're going with slurry applications anyhow. And you might look at your tractor horsepower because more horsepower is required. So that's it, Brendan. They're the benefits of protected urea and low emission slurry spreading.
That's great, Peter. Thank you very much now for that, Peter. So now at this stage of the evening, folks, I'm going to just call on Vivian, who has a couple of questions there that has come in there from our audience. We have a lot of farmers listening tonight, so Vivian, you can take over and ask some of the questions there to Mary and Peter.
Thanks, Brendan. The questions are coming in. There's a couple of questions for each speaker, so I'll start off with Mary. Mary, question in MCPA. Can it be applied to GLOS low input parcels?
Okay, no is the straight answer on that. You cannot apply MCPA because if you're applying MCPA, you're spraying it on, and it's going to catch other plants there. And the whole theory behind the low input pasture is that you're letting more than native species grow up flower, seed, and you do not want to be spraying them. So no, MCPA is not the appropriate spray. If you are having low input pasture and you are in GLOS and you want to control rushes, then you'll be looking at using a weed licker with a glyphosate type product as your method of control, other than going out and manually topping. But if you decided that you were using a pesticide, then it would have to be through weed licking.
Okay, Mary, thank you. Just another one on the MCPA as well. Can it be used in weed licks, and does the 5 meter buffer zone still hold? Okay,
and again, I seem very negative, but the answer is no. Again, it cannot be used. There's only one way that MCPA is licensed for use, and that is through a boom sprayer. It is not licensed for use in a weed licker, and neither is it licensed for use actually in a boom sprayer. So neither of those will work. And so the 5 meters, the reason the 5 meters is there with the MCPA is because there's only one way it's licensed for use, and that's through a boom sprayer. And if you're using a boom sprayer, then if you have any sort of windy conditions at all, you are going to get some bit of spray drift. So to prevent that spray drift, you have a 5 meter buffer. Now, the only thing I will just mention is to farmers is there's only one way that you can affect that 5 meters and reduce it down slightly, and that will be by changing your spray nozzles and using what we call low drift nozzles. And if you put on a low drift nozzle, basically the way they work is they will pump oxygen into the drop and make it heavier, so it will not float as far and it'll go more down. So you're not going to get as much drift off a low drift nozzle, and you may be allowed, depending on the type of nozzle, you could be allowed to reduce your buffer zone from the 5 meters by maybe 30%, 20%, and some of them for the really stronger ones, maybe even 50%. Depends on your nozzle. Check and see what it says on the nozzle, but otherwise it's 5 meters and that's it when it comes to MCPA.
Okay, Mary, just on the topic of weed lickers, and I'll finish with you at that rate.
Yeah.
Is there any update on using weed lickers as there was to be testing regulations carried out on them?
Okay. Yes, the weed lickers, the Department of Agriculture had said that they would fall in to be tested this year, and they were working on the statutory instrument to bring that into being a regulation. But because of all with Brexit, etc., they haven't written that regulation yet. So as far as I'm aware, we have at least another year until the regulation comes in, which will require you to have your weed licker tested. But as of now, at the moment, there is no spec there that is available for you to test your weed licker. So just at the minute, no.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary. I'll move on to Sean. Sean, there's a couple of questions here on the beehives. How much would it cost to get started up in a hive of bees? And what are the running costs, I suppose, after that, if someone is thinking about doing it?
Well, I suppose if you're in the Newport catchment, you might be lucky enough to get one for nothing. If you're
Okay.
in our program, or if you're on a group water scheme as well. If you're in a group scheme, contact any of your group scheme board members, and they can put you in touch with me to do that. But I suppose typically to get set up in the first year, you have to buy your clothes, you have to buy your equipment and smoker. So for the first year, to buy your bees, to buy your hive and your equipment would probably cost about €500.
Okay.
And then after that going on, if you wanted an extra hive the following year, it'd be €200. So the bees kind of, you split your hive every year. So you have one hive the first year, the next year you have two hives. So you don't have to keep buying bees every time. So
Okay.
it's €500 for the first year. You won't get a product the first year, but the second year you probably get about 60 jars of honey, 60 to 70 jars of honey, and that's about €7 or €8 a jar as well. So there's a nice little return as well. And they don't need feed. Well, they need feeding. They go to flowers and plants. You have to create habitats on your farm, hedgerows, wild meadow buffer zones. So it's not an awfully expensive thing to get into.
Is it time consuming? Do they need much care, Sean?
Not really. In the winter, they need very little care. Once they're kind of strapped down from October to January, very little. Then once a week for 20 minutes per hive.
Okay.
In the summer. So no, it's not very time consuming, and it's a nice pastime as well. I have my daughter involved as well in it, and now I started about 2 years ago. I'm learning a lot from Jude Walsh from the Mayo Beekeepers Association. It's a nice pastime. And the farmers that we have involved now in Roscommon, they really enjoy it as well.
Okay, and we appreciate and understand the environmental benefits. Can the benefits of having beehives on a farm be shown to farms in financial terms so they can weigh up possibly going down this road?
I suppose they can. Like, it probably talk to more qualified beekeepers than myself to get that. I know if you'd want a serious number of hives to make a good living out of it. But I know myself now, I probably get 50, 60 jars of honey every year out of it. Now, I don't sell it because you have more people ask you for it than they would want, then you sell it. But if you have a decent number of hives, you can sell it. And to buy raw honey is very expensive.
Yeah, and it's a very good holistic product as well.
It is, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Good few questions coming in for Peter. Peter, the first one I have here is, will protected urea act as fast as can?
Yeah, well, it almost as fast as can, as you know, because it's converted to ammonium first. So I suppose the answer is it's more the same as ordinary urea. So that in terms of acting, so a bit slower, but that makes it all a little bit safer. Like, it takes a few days to convert into ammonium. And then that has to convert into nitrate. So whereas with can, like half the nitrogen is in ammonium form and the other half is straight in nitrate. So that's why you get the quicker boost with the can. So it's in terms of acting, it's much the same as ordinary urea.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, so it wouldn't just be exactly as fast. But I mean, it's safer product, and because it still releases enough to get the grass growing, and it's safer, then it doesn't leach as much.
Okay, I think you mentioned it in your presentation. Just on a point of clarification, can protected urea be purchased with P and K in it,
Yes, it can be purchased. It can be purchased with K and sulfur.
Okay.
But of course, we're trying to get farmers to concentrate on the straight nitrogen for a start, because there's so little being used. If we could get them to just convert their ordinary urea purchases to protected urea, that'd be a huge start. So yes with K, yes with sulfur, but not with P, because the phosphorus will, if it's stored, you cannot mix the phosphorus with the urease inhibitor because it breaks it down.
Okay.
At the minute, there could be further science in a few years' time that will overcome that.
Okay. And moving on slightly, Peter, how does retrofitting a splash plate slurry tank work out and attaching a dribble trailing shoe to the above tank? Is that successful?
Well, as far as I'm no expert in this, but I gather it is. But I'd say there could be more qualified people than me now on that one. When I was a dairy advisor, dairy farmers used to tell me, that they got it to work fine, But I don't. So, like it's granted under the TAMS.
That's right. I just about to make the point. It's granted under the TAMS retrofit.
Yeah. So as I say, I wouldn't be an expert on that. How good it is.
Okay. Another question, Peter. Just going back slightly for a second. On the urea, can protected urea be applied around the same time as slurry, or is there a fear of maybe excess losses? I think you alluded to it in your presentation.
Yeah, well, generally it's the same rule really as ordinary urea. You'd be expected to keep them at least a week apart. See, a lot depends on the weather and the rate you're going with the slurry. If you go with slurry, like you can wait at least a week before you'd be thinking of going out with your chemical fertilizer, whether it's urea or anything else. But the last thing you want to do is spread the urea, we'll say, and then cover it over with a heavy dose of slurry, because you can get denitrification there and increased losses. So as I say, generally about a week, depending on the rate of the slurry and the weather in between, because if you go with a low amount of slurry and it's watery slurry and it rains, sure, you'll hardly see it the next day.
Yeah, I think we mentioned it a minute ago, Peter, but just another question here. The retrofit is TAMS aid granted. Am I right on that? For the dribble bear?
Yes, it was. Anyhow,
it still is.
Yeah,
still is, as far as I know.
Yeah.
It's just a quick question come in there.
Yeah.
One more question, one or two more questions for Sean on the beehives. Sean, must have someone from my own county, County Galway, on here tonight. Is the scheme available in Glenamaddy, County Galway, in terms of the beehives?
Well, this particular scheme in Newport's not, but again, if the person is on a group water scheme, if they contact that group water scheme board or members, I'm sure there's something we can do, because we're trying to promote, I suppose, protecting our water sources all across the country. So if anybody is interested and they're on a group water scheme, just contact the group water scheme board and we'll try and help them out.
Okay, and we're almost at 9 o'clock. Just one final question for Peter. Peter, do you think it will come to the stage that protected urea is the only form of straight-in fertilizer which can be purchased? Is that on the horizon?
I put up I wouldn't say so, Vivian, because like the department target there was if they could get, what was it, 65%, I think, and they had very ambitious targets there. So like if they could get to that, I'd say everyone would be more than happy. Like if you could get 65% of can converted to protected urea, and of course the straight urea taken off the market altogether. Like that would be huge. That would be a huge gain. So I cannot see it coming off totally.
Yeah, just one quick question. So here, one question came in there from two different people. On the use of slurry in your urea application and lime application, can you use the protected urea nearer liming than ordinary urea?
Yeah, well, the researcher we were talking to, like Patrick Forrestal in Johnstone Castle, he'd say, yeah, to be safe, just stick with the 3-month rule. If you put out lime or keep them 3 months apart, because they haven't got the work done on that yet. But he did say he did a quick experiment himself, and he would be of the mind that protected urea is pretty safe when close to lime spreading, because it seems to be, it has a higher tolerance for a higher pH, shall we say. But
Thanks,
he
Peter.
would, he just needs to do more work on that.
Okay, we'll watch that space. Folks, thanks very much for all your questions. I'll hand back to Brendan now just to conclude.
Yeah, thanks, Vivian, and look, thanks again there to Sean, to Mary, and to Peter for very informative presentations. And just to remind listeners again tonight, look at this. You know, as Peter mentioned, the TAMS deadline there, the last application date there for the latest tranche is the 16th of April. So just to watch out for that. And indeed, look at, I suppose, look at all that's left for us to say is that we'll be back here again next Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. The focus next Wednesday night will be on lambing and lambing mortality, particularly in around mid-season lambing flocks. So that's something just to watch out for. All the usual links will be up on social media, which is the Facebook page from Teagasc Mayo here, and indeed on the Teagasc Twitter page. We hope to put this recording up in the coming days on our Teagasc YouTube channel. So certainly look at, you can share that back with anyone who missed tonight's episode. And indeed, look at, over the next 8 weeks, we'll be talking about topics such as grassland management, health and safety, your well-being, farm diversification, the benefits of completing the green start. So we have something there for every family here. And indeed, look at, you're all welcome to attend those. And as Vivian said at the start, anybody who registered for tonight will get a reminder email there next Wednesday evening, you know, after the event. So look at, you know, again, all I'd like to say is, look at, thanks to you all again for participating and engaging with our panelists here tonight. I think there's some great messages there given by Peter, by Mary, and by Sean, and we hope that, look at, that be a great population of bees down in Newport in the coming areas. And indeed, thanks to Vivian there for putting the questions there to our panelists tonight. So indeed, look at, all that's left for me to say is good night to you all, and indeed, you know, certainly keep safe during these unprecedented times. So good night, and indeed, we hope to see you all again next week. Thanks, folks.